Hi friends, welcome to another episode of Making Disciples. My name is Chris and I'm your host. In today's episode we are going to have an interview with Adrian Semerene. Great name. It's from Gamlingay Baptist Church, and I met him a few months back at a conference called Fresh Streams. An amazing conference, and just had so much fun. I was there speaking, and he was also one of the speakers. On the final day he was talking about unity, which is a topic I'd love to interview him on again in the future. But I just thought he had a really interesting approach to discipleship and what it means for us to live our lives wholeheartedly for Jesus. And wanted to talk to him really around humility and, as disciples, what does humility look like? How do we live out humility? And it was just such a fantastic conversation. So I hope that this interview with Adrian is such a blessing to you as it was to me to spend some time with him and talk about humility. So I'm not going to do a massive preamble. We'll jump in a second. But big thank you to you, the listeners, for joining and spending a bit of time with us today. If you've yet to subscribe, then I'd love to encourage you to do that. So we have so many people listen to this podcast who don't subscribe, which means that you don't have it ping up on your phone when the next episode is out. I'd love you to do that, and have the next edition appear on your device or whatever way you listen to this podcast. So please do think about subscribing. And I've not said this for a little while, but do recommend this podcast to friends as well. People don't just stumble upon podcasts, they're recommended to them. So I'd love to encourage you to recommend this podcast to people. Anybody who's growing as a disciple of Jesus, do encourage them to listen in on this podcast. So let's jump in. Interview with Adrian Semerene, and we're going to have a conversation around humility. Adrian, thank you so much for spending some time with us on Making Disciples. Now, I heard you speak a few weeks ago at a conference. I thought this guy has really got some interesting stuff to say around discipleship. And then I emailed you and said, what topics would you like to cover? And you said, well, one would be on humility. Nobody has ever said to me, let's talk about humility.
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. But second of all, yeah, I'd imagine it's a topic that most of us don't like to talk about because as soon as we bring it up, we're automatically considered as not humble. Or usually when people want to talk about it, they talk about it of, how I've achieved humility and you have to follow, which is in itself a contradiction. So, but I do think humility is key to discipleship. I do think humility is key to what we see in the life of Jesus, what we see that we should be modeling out, that we should be leading through, that we should be following in. But I agree. It's not something that there's a few books out there. Some people have written some. R.T. Kendall has one. There's a recent one by a gentleman called Paul Friend, who's with Swim, and he's written one called Fierce Humility, and they're great, but I don't think there's enough out there. And one of the things that really interests me is I don't think there's a real theological study of humility. I think there's a lack of a theology of humility, if you will, which I think is key. And it'd be interesting to me to see what develops over the next kind of 5-10 years in that field, because it's key, I believe, to being a disciple.
Right. That's where I want to start. So, yeah, this is a podcast all about discipleship. You just said it's key to discipleship. Why? Why is this an important issue? And particularly from the aspect of, what is your understanding of discipleship? How do you talk about what this is?
Yeah, no. So I think discipleship ultimately comes down to being formed in the likeness of Jesus, to essentially follow him. He is our leader. He is the example. Obviously, he's the rabbi to those actual disciples to start with. And so I think discipleship is really teaching or learning, depending on if we're the disciple or the discipler, right? But it's being taught or learning how to live a life like that of Jesus. And the reason I think humility is key is because I think, when Jesus walked the earth, he is God embodied. He knows everything. He has every answer, beginning and the end. Yet the way he approaches every conversation, the way he approaches the woman at the well, the way he approaches his own 12, the way he approaches, those absolutely stuck in sin, those who are possessed across the board. He never approaches them, even though he is God. And even though there are moments in scripture where he goes, hey, I am he who you are speaking of, he always comes at it in such a humble, servant, loving way. One of the reasons, that many of the Jews at the time did not recognize Jesus as the Messiah was because they were expecting this, big, powerful leader to come with all might on, and take down the empire. And he comes subverging all of that. So in this kind of subversive, calm, humble way. And I think part of that is one of the reasons that people didn't recognize it. He's too humble. He's not the one. He's not the guy. But actually, we see him washing the disciples' feet,
Mm.
and oftentimes that account in Scripture is so looked at and spoken of as how we should be serving one another. And it's all about service. And yes, there is that obviously very clearly there. But I also think there's a sense of Jesus humbling himself, lowering himself before his disciples and saying, "Hey, as I serve you, I'm going to humble myself." And he did so even to the one who would betray him. Like, even to those who are perhaps seen as against him, he's like, I'm going to serve and I'm going to do it in a humble way. And so I think when we talk about what it looks like for us to walk like Jesus, talk like Jesus, love like Jesus, serve like Jesus,
Mm.
humility has to be a big part of that.
Mm.
And when you look at the flip side of perhaps where there are most tensions among brothers and sisters, denominational divides, theological divides, I, I I might disagree with you on some theological topics. We might agree perfectly on things, but if we can come at a conversation humbly,
Mm.
recognizing that there are potentially some non-negotiables for me, that who Jesus is is a pretty non-negotiable. But then there's other things throughout history that perhaps we have disagreed on, which come down to interpretation. And can I humbly come to a table
Mm.
and have a conversation with you in my discipleship, in your discipleship, and recognizing that we're not fully formed yet, we're not fully there? Go, okay, well, how can we have these conversations and move forward in a way that we are united? And so it links in with unity, it links in with discipleship and all these things. But
Mm.
I'm rambling a bit, so there you
No,
go.
it's good. I having grown up in a charismatic, slightly more conservative background, discipleship for me was always, as a kid, was always about doing the stuff that Jesus did. So we learned a lot about prayer ministry. We learned a
Yeah.
lot about serving, like the washing of the feet. But when it
Yep.
came to character, there was less interest in that. And it seems to me that actually the character stuff feeds into the start of all the other things. The way that
Absolutely.
Jesus approaches the woman at the well, like you just said. And so we talk about character here, character formation into the likeness of Jesus, not just theological formation or
Yeah.
practice formation, but actually at the start, if our character isn't centered around Jesus, we could be doing all the right stuff in terms of prayer ministry and serving the poor. But if our character is not right, we can be arrogant in our serving, arrogant in our prayer, and then we get arrogant in telling people what they should and shouldn't do because we know best.
Yeah.
And yes, that's
And
part of that is confidence, but actually it's character, isn't it, that forms
100%.
all of that.
I think 100%. And I think more and more we see, part of people's ministerial formation includes that of, character building and things like that. But I think historically it's probably not been our big focus. The big focus has been, have you gone and studied your scriptures? Do you know them? Do you have your, doctrine of this, doctrine of that, whatever it may be? That's what we've formed our leadership on and our discipleship on. And I think so often, again, I love Jesus' greatest commandment is to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And we tend to pick that apart, I think. I think we tend to find the things that we like and maybe agree with and hold on to those. So when those of us who are more academically minded love God with all of your mind, great. I can study him and I can go for it and I can go all there. Well, all of my strength, well, those of us who have energy and will give it and will serve and will serve and will serve and all of our heart, right? What does that look like? What does it look like to actually emotionally love God and be able to
Mm.
humble myself emotionally to others. All of our soul, that spiritual side of things, where actually there is a call to in our prayer ministry, love God. And then all of these things, I think, Francis Chan years and years ago wrote a book called Erasing Hell. So nothing about what we're talking about now. But before he wrote the book, and he was writing it kind of to maybe almost as a counter to a book that was written by somebody else that was kind of theologically questioned at the time. And you can dig into more of that if you want. But he released this video because he obviously has a big following and people and this video was him simply asking people to pray for him. And he very visually kind of said, hey, you know what? As I'm approaching my study of this view of what comes next after life, what comes, past our death, I am approaching it with a certain level of understanding. Place my hand at my eye level, for example. I am there, but God's understanding will always be heads and heads and heads, miles above my head.
Mm.
And I want you, and he's like, I ask that you would pray for me that as my understanding gets closer and grows closer to that of God's, that I would never think I have it so figured out that my understanding is that above God, that I've fluctuated, that he is knows less than I do. And I think so often in some of our understandings, whether it be theological or how to serve, how to pray, we get to the point where we're like, oh, right, I've cracked it. This is the way we do it. It's my way. I finally had it, whether it be through divine revelation or through teaching. And so my way is the only way. Where
Mm.
actually, I think we need to recognize that God's way is the only way,
Mm.
and how God connects with all of us from different cultures, from different backgrounds, all of us, his people, made in his image. Though we look physically different, though we act, emotionally different, we're all his that he's made. So somehow we have to recognize that he is above all,
Mm.
and that I'm still trying to play catch up to that and will be until the day I die and past that. I'm never going to be have more understanding than God. And if I can have that mentality in my conversation with someone who's just come to faith, or someone who's got 3 PhDs, or someone who's been preaching from platforms across the world, whatever situation I'm in, if I can have that mentality of God's got it. And I think this is where I'm at now. This is the revelation, my understanding, my journeying thus far. However, there's a chance that I've got some of this wrong.
Mm.
There's a chance that maybe I've still got to learn some stuff. So let me hold that with a sense of God, of saying, God, you do with me what you want, but let's go forward.
Mm. I like that. I like that. The opposite of humility is pride.
Yeah,
Pride is so subtle,
incredibly.
and I've seen in others, because it's always easier to point it out in others, so it must also be in me. But I've seen those who think they are being humble, but in their humility, there's pride in their humility,
Yeah,
and there's pride in how they, I may come humbly at something, but I know this is right. And
yeah,
pride is subtle, isn't it? It's so subtle, and it's almost like little weeds in the garden that are really hard to pull out. You
absolutely.
pull one out here, and there's another one over there. How do we deal with that when it's just riddled within our makeup? How do we root it out?
Well, I think in part you started kind of answering your own question in as much as, hey, it's easier to point it out in others, and it's harder to point it out in oneself. And so part of the way we root it out is we journey with those
Mm.
that are part of our tribe. I love that Jesus had his 12, and from his 12 he had his three, and from his three he had the one, and but within that, we as disciples ourselves, as we disciple others, need to have people that we give permission to, that we journey with. That if they say, hey, you know what, if someone, there's a few in my tribe, if you will, that if they pull me aside and go, Adrian, let's have a real chat. Like, I love you, love that you love Jesus, but you've gotten this wrong. You're building yourself up. This isn't about the kingdom. This is about you. This isn't about others. I need to be able, there are people in my life that I need, that if they say that, I almost don't question it. I almost got to take it. I say, yes, okay, right. We are journeying this together. Unless I fully think I'm like, oh my goodness, there's something, then there might be some pushback, but we
Yeah.
have to journey these things together. We have to go, hold on. If somebody else is seeing in me something that isn't of Jesus, I need to humble myself enough to say, okay, what is it that you're not seeing? And then saying, how did I get here?
Mm,
I think that's part of that analysis of going, uh, you know, one of the greatest quotes is that the enemy doesn't always lie 100%. He'll give you 99% truth and 1% lie.
mm,
And that little 1% buys you in, you buy into that 1% of a lie, and then it's a slippery slope from there. You've suddenly gone way off of where you wanted to. And I think being able to reflect back and go, okay, well, what was it that led me down this? I thought I was being humble. I thought I was serving as I was called to, and now suddenly I'm not. But I think
mm,
in everything, I think not only is it journeying with people, it's also just having a posture change. We see Jesus as this servant leader, and we talk of him as a servant leader. But I think that that servant can almost be replaced with humble leader. We often talk about,
mm,
the leaders that we have, and who we're called to be and how we're called to lead. But if in our leadership we don't have that posture change, to be able to lower ourselves on a regular basis, and have people around us, to lower us, then again, I think we're missing something. If we go down 10, 15 years down the line of whether it be ministry or family life or whatever, as disciples, we're everywhere in whatever workplace we're in whatever church that we're serving in. If we go down all this time and we're never seeing ourselves changed and challenged, then something's wrong. One of the questions I ask of our church on a regular basis is, do you look more like Jesus today than you did yesterday? You might not be able to see the change from yesterday to today, but okay, what about last year? Are you more like Jesus today than you were last year? Have you humbly walked in forgiveness to those who you've really struggled to forgive? Have you humbly walked in service to those who you don't really want to serve? Have you humbly allowed someone else to speak into your life and call you out on your sin, on your addictions, on your journeys? And have you been honest with yourself? Have you humbled yourself before God and let Him speak into your situations? One of the things that I battle with, and those who are listening won't be able to know but you see me, I'm a big guy. I'm a really not just tall guy. I'm a huggable, larger than life kind of guy. Um, but one of the things I talk about is that I didn't get to this size just by chance. One of the sins that I battle on a regular basis is that of gluttony, um, and that's one of the sins that for some reason our culture doesn't call out. It's okay. It's almost taboo to speak of it. And I've walked into churches, I've walked into places where they're like, "Oh, you're just big boned, Adrian." I'm like, with respect, my gut is not a bone. you know? So we have to have again people. Now, if everybody walked up to me and said, "Adrian, you're fat, get on it." I'm like, "Whoa, okay, hold on." There's a way, but it's not just a health thing, though it does affect my health. It's not just a lifestyle thing, though it is part of that. It's a sin thing. It's a spiritual formation thing that actually I need to recognize that is one of the things I battle and one of my sins. So I need to give people permission to call me on it, and I need people to walk alongside me. And when I have been, in quotes, my fittest, is when I've had those people walk alongside me. And almost hold my hand and almost treat me like a child when it comes to Adrian. You don't need to eat that. Come on, get out for a walk. Come on, jump on your bike. Because actually, that's perhaps part of my walk of faith where I'm still a bit of a baby Christian. That sin still has deep roots in me. And I've had people pray and I've had people, but we're journeying it.
mm.
I have to be humble enough. And again, talking about humility here, I'm giving an example where perhaps, such a contradictory,
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
hear this in a prideful way, but I have to be humble enough to let those around me say, Adrian, mate, you're not hungry. You don't need this food. Your body doesn't need it. This is an act of gluttony. This is you stepping into sin, step away.
Mm.
And I need to allow people to do that. And whether your sin is gluttony or whether it's addictions
Yeah.
to alcohol or pornography or any other thing, we need to just allow people to speak into our lives and hold our hands to it if we need to.
Yeah. Do you know Adam Savage? Mythbusters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So he runs a YouTube channel called Tested.
Okay.
And I'm a paid up subscriber. And, he does these interviews. You can ask questions, and one of the subscribers asked the question of him I was watching an episode of MythBusters from about 17 years ago, and you were smoking in the episode. Do you still smoke? And do you think it's a good idea to be seen in the public to smoke? I love your thoughts on that kind of thing. And Adam said, well, actually, for years I was on, off, on, off, on, off smoker until 15 years ago when I stopped. He said the reason I stopped was for years I'd been trying to be a person who was stopping smoking. I was just trying to stop smoking. And I realized 15 years ago I had to stop being somebody who's trying to stop smoking, and I had to be somebody who was now a non-smoker. So he said 15 years ago I became a non-smoker, and that radically changed because I was no longer trying to stop something, I was becoming something. And that
Yeah.
really struck me. I was like, wow, Paul says take off greed,
Yep.
take off pride, take off taking all things you take off. And then he says, put on Christ. And saying Christ, that's shorthand, isn't it, for the
Yeah.
attributes of Jesus Christ. And I was like,
Absolutely.
wow, Adam Savage has just preached something. I just thought it was wonderful. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, yeah, we could be saying to people now, you need to be less prideful.
Mm.
But actually, the approach is we need to become more humble.
Yeah.
And
And
as
that's
we
and that's
say,
what we see. That's what we see in scripture as well. I mean, you talk about Paul, but it's over and over. And I pulled some of the scriptures up just to kind of quickly refer to them. But in Ephesians 4, as a prisoner of the Lord, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep unity in the spirit through the bond of peace. Like over and over, he talks
mm,
about humility. In Philippians, he says the same thing. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Like repeatedly, again, oftentimes, like you were
mm,
saying, we would look at, oh, well, scripture says don't be prideful. It does, but more often than not, we see the encouragement to be humble than
mm,
we do, don't be proud, don't be. Okay, yes, but actually be humble. Step into
mm,
that. And I think we love to step into so many of the other things. Love your neighbor, serve this, do that. But humility, because it's hard to step into humility. It's not something that people want to do. And the thing is, oftentimes we confuse humility with putting ourselves down, right? We like, if
yeah,
I'm going to be humble, oh, I'm so rubbish, I'm so not worth it. I'm so no, 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 no. You are still a child of God, made in the image of Christ, like gifted, poured out, the Spirit poured out for you, poured into you. Like, oh my goodness, you are flipping awesome. Yet you are called to be humble.
yeah.
There's no one else like you, Chris. There's no one else like you. There is only one Chris Rogers. I say it. There's only one Angel. Like we can talk about how unique we are, how beautifully crafted we are, how different we are, how special and blessed we are, because it's all true. And that can easily become something that we boast about, that we're pride filled about, that we're overly proud about. But the reality is while those things are true, we are called to just simply be humble, to in humility value others above us, to humbly serve and humbly love. And I think that's key of it. It's becoming humble.
Let me ask a question then. So I've got lots of friends who, in their workplaces, the game is not humility. The game is to
Yeah,
push yourself above others, to step on others, to use others to get where you are going. And there'll be
yeah,
some people listening to this going, yeah, this sounds amazing, but actually where I work, if I manifested humility, all that will happen to me is I'll get trod upon and seen as somebody who's weak. Now we know the
yeah,
kingdom is upside down, the upside down kingdom, and the kingdom of God, what we see as weakness is strength. We know that. But
yeah.
but practicing that Monday through Friday in your workplace can actually be very difficult. Do you have any thoughts on how somebody who's in a stressful work environment where humility is used as a weapon to hold people back, how do we act humbly in those places whilst at the same time not um becoming somebody that's walked upon?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And I think there's no one answer, one size fit all answer. I think one of the things that we have to be reminded of on a regular basis, regardless of where we work or what our life placement is that following Jesus is costly. I think so often we have talked about a gospel that is amazing, and we've talked about this grace. Bonhoeffer talks about this cheap grace. I think that we've almost been sold, where you can just receive it and that's it. And But the reality is that following Jesus isn't cheap. It is
Mm.
costly, and it is difficult and painful, and it is also countercultural. And so the first thing I say, if you're in a place where you're stuck in the rat race, perhaps, or your job is one of those where you can't actually seek humility, you can't actually be like that because it's seen as weakness. The first thing I'd ask is to maybe just take a step back and ask yourself, what is your priority in your workplace? If your priority in your workplace is to be number one and it's to make money and whatever it may be, dot, 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 then following the way of Jesus, being a disciple in that place is going to be incredibly difficult and you might almost disregard everything we're saying. But if your priority in your workplace is to love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, to love your neighbor as yourself, if our priorities in our workplaces are the same as they are on a Sunday morning in church, if our priority is the same for Monday through Sunday, then and this is going to be hard to say and hard to listen to, but then actually if our priority is out of Jesus, then we have to recognize that might come with challenge and difficulty. So actually it might be uncomfortable to step in humility. And again, humility isn't putting yourself down. It is essentially walking humbly and going, hey, this is where I'm presenting, this is what I'm doing. I think this is the best way. If others have another idea, okay, I'll walk with you, but this is it. So it's not shutting down your voice, it's not being
Mm.
heard, but it's how we present those things. But ultimately knowing that if you are, again, if you're being seen as weak, there is still a moment of not throwing in the face of, well, I'm humbly saying that this is, because then that becomes
Mm.
pride filled. But I think there's a
Yeah.
space in actually how we step into that moment to say, again, I believe this is the best solution. That quarter four sales are going to be up because of this. If we do this, this, and the other, I think you're wrong. Okay, I respectfully disagree. But if you're the one we're going to follow, then let's follow that. But let's go.
Mm.
That in itself is a humble thing to say. Hey, I've made myself heard. I've made myself known, but I will follow another. Um, but again, humility and you got to recognize that we're also talking
Mm.
about humility in terms of following that of Jesus, and we're also talking about a worldly job perhaps which is not following that of Jesus. So again, where's the priority? Is our priority to be more Jesus-like in that space, which will then be then, hey, we're gonna get down on our knees and wash the feet of those around us, or is it gonna be, hey, I'm gonna lead for my own career, my own benefit, and that's an unpopular statement, and I get that, and it's also a very difficult statement, and I get that, and this is coming from a guy who works for the church. So some people would be like, "Oh, you
Mm.
got it easy, Adrian. Like, you don't have to face all those things." And you're right. In one sense, I don't. But I actually face them more often than not through these kind of conversations with people where I sit down across a
Mm.
coffee table with someone. They're like, "Man, this is what I'm facing at work, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to process it, and I don't know what my next
Mm.
steps are." And in all of these things, my answer is always going to be, "Well, actually, let's just look to Jesus.
Mm.
How would he humbly walk in this? How would he serve in this?" And ultimately, for anyone listening, the decision is yours. That is the beautiful thing about it. You don't have to listen to some random guy in the middle of nowhere village called Gamlingay. You don't have to listen to Chris. You don't have to, and ultimately, you don't even have to listen to Jesus. We hope you do, but he is gracious
Yeah.
enough to give us that free will.
So we've got a few minutes left.
Yeah,
And you
sorry.
said earlier something really interesting one I'll come back to. We said we don't really have much of a theology of humility.
Mm.
Like, how would you start to think about what a theology of humility is?
Well, so I guess one of the things I mean specifically around that is that we have kind of our doctrinal statements or doctrinal views around
Mm.
certain aspects of theology, whether it be women in ministry or sexuality or salvation or the baptism and things like that. But none of us have a view of humility that we have unpacked enough that we have taken time, I would say, to really hold on to. We just see humility as a good virtue, as a good value to have.
Mm.
So I think realistically, to unpack a theology of humility, we need to look at humility across that of Scripture and recognizing that it is everywhere. I think from Genesis through to Revelation, there is the word humble or humility may not be in it, but the way God speaks of our role of His people within that, there is much in that. So I think we have to start kind of tackling the study of, hey, what is it? What are we pulling out? What are we seeing across the board? And recognizing the kind of the links and the ties between them all.
Yeah.
And then I think from that formation coming to a point where we can say, hey, there's something really symbolic, really key to our discipleship, to our ministry, to life in general, that we, I think, have been missing for dare I say millennia, perhaps, because we haven't really dug into it.
Yeah, I love looking back at Genesis 1, 2, and 3 when it comes to
Yeah,
humility, because I think a theology of humility starts in um, before we even existed, God was. He's the one in charge.
yeah,
We are
yep,
made in His image, not Him in our image.
yep,
We're called to tend, dress, and care for creation, yet we ate the apple. We did the very thing we were told not to do. And at
yeah,
the heart of a theology of humility, I wrote down this phrase, is defining humility as total dependence on God.
yeah,
When we have a right understanding of the position of humanity in terms of God and creation, then we can then understand how we are to be and act underneath that. When you don't
exactly.
believe in that, then there is no need for humility, because
Hmm.
it's the battle for the fittest. It's, winner takes it all. But
Absolutely.
when we see ourselves as a part of God's plan, in His image, His creation, to partner and tend creation with Him,
Mm,
actually our position is a very humbling position.
absolutely.
Why would God ever want to work with us? Why would He want
Yeah,
to? But yet He does. And that
absolutely.
for me is at the heart of what somehow in all of that, that's where the heart and theology of humility comes from. It's from who we are designed to be like.
Absolutely. I think genuinely speaking, one of the reasons it's so core to our discipleship is because it is, like you were saying, it is part of our creation. It is part of what we were made to be. You know, a couple of decades ago, one of the most popular wristbands and little phrases was WWJD. What would Jesus do? And I know it's cheesy and I know it's corny, but I think actually, if in our day-to-day decisions we thought of things and kind of turned our positioning, our posture to go, actually, what would Jesus do? Because he is above me and his thinking is better than my thinking and his direction is better than mine. So
Mm.
what would Jesus do? How, in that work environment, what would Jesus do if he was stood right there? What would Jesus do with my dad or with my mom or with my sisters, or what would Jesus do? Because at that point, we are not only valuing someone else's view and opinion above ours, but we're valuing Jesus's above ours, which there's no better, right? There's no better than his.
Oh man.
Um, but it is a reality of going, I'm not right in everything.
Mm.
And it's so countercultural because the society says, hey, if you believe it, you are it. You are right in whatever you hold on to. It's fine. Hold on to your truth. Your truth is your truth, and that's fine. You know, but that's not a reality of the truth. That's not the truth of life, of the universe, of the kingdom of God. That's not something that we hold on to. And it is difficult because, I've got three kids and all three of them are growing up in a world where you can genuinely believe anything you want to about absolutely everything. Yet somehow they have to also come to the recognition that actually that's not true. That God is in control, that He made it all, and that it's His way that we want to follow. And that my emotions might tell me one thing, but actually, ultimately, I want to submit to Him above all else.
That's a great place to land. Adrian, thank you so much speaking into this. It's amazing. If you make some awesome little videos and things, I've seen them online. If people want to follow you, hear what you have to say a little bit more in the way of Jesus, how can they find you?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been great. Love it. Yeah, so I'm on socials and our church is on socials. So I'm at A Semerene. That's ASEMERENE. It's funky and weird. But then the church is at GB_church. We put up little shorts, kind of just little thought-provoking thing. Our prayer is always that if one person watches or hears something that points them to Jesus, then it's a glorious moment for the kingdom and for us. So yeah, that's about it. But
Great.
yeah, I'm on Google. Just look me up.
I'll put your Instagram that you just mentioned in the show notes so people don't have to
Amazing.
try and spell your last name. Um,
It's a joy. It's a joy.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'd love to have you back on at some point soon. It's been really fun talking to you about humility, a topic we don't often kind of wade into. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. Love to see you again.
Grace and peace.